a lot of extinction of species, or certainly the reduction in the number of animals within a species and the number of species themselves, is predominantly due to habitat loss. And a lot of that is due to us as humans and how we use the land and what we do with it. It's also due to climate change. It's playing a big part. It's causing loss of habitat. So that's the main cause, really. Unfortunately, humans have an awful lot to do with it, whether it's through our use of plastics, whether it's through our use of fossil fuels and the effect on climate change, whether it's through us building where we shouldn't be building, or like the situation you have in Indonesia with the orangutans, where, you know, vast swathes of rainforest being cut down for palm oil, which is predominantly being used by the West. It's a lot of it is about loss of habitat, really, with a lot of species. We're just taking their homes away from them.
Okay, so the impact of coastal erosion is quite important for coastal habitats and species that live in particular habitats that are in coastal systems. So, for example, sand dunes are quite rare landforms and rare habitats in their own right. And where you have coastal erosion, you reduce the area of habitat over time because of the loss of land, essentially. And that means that some important and rare species lose their home, and that is obviously detrimental to their overall long-term survival.
By its very nature, erosion means that you are losing something. In our case, obviously, it's the loss of land to the sea. Yes, it can be negative if that landscape is not allowed to move naturally. So in the case of Formby, the sand dunes are rolling inland, and actually if there was nothing behind those sand dunes, then actually that rolling inland, the dunes would keep their same width. You'd still have the same amount of habitat. It would just move further and further inland. The issue we have is that humans and what humans have done has put barriers behind that land. So we've got things like car parks that are in places where they shouldn't be. Obviously there's not so much at Formby, but elsewhere on the coast you've got buildings that are within that area where the land's trying to move back into. So it's more not that coastal erosion itself is a bad thing. Actually, it's the fact that we've put obstacles in the way that have stopped that natural process happening. That's where the habitat loss comes in. The extinction of some species and the actual reduction within numbers of species that are left is of great concern, not just to us here at Formby, but actually to the National Trust as a whole. We have a programme at the moment called Land, Outdoors and Nature, and one of the things that focuses on is to try to reverse that decline in species across the land within the UK, particularly obviously on the land that the National Trust cares for. And it should be a massive worry to every single person on this planet that species are being lost and numbers within species are being lost. There's an awful lot of things that we as individuals can do to help. It can be as simple as, for us in relation to things like natterjack toads breed in pools within the dunes. Don't go into those pools, and don't let your dogs go into those pools during the breeding season. That in itself can make a huge difference to natterjack toads. A little bit of disturbance of their habitat can stop them breeding, can kill the young if they've already bred. So that is a really, really simple thing that people can do, just not disturb habitats. And it's the same with a lot of things. You know, if somebody's put a path somewhere or put a sign somewhere saying please don't go in this area or please keep to the path, do that. You know, follow. People have put signs up, people have put things in place not for the good of our health. We've done it because we're trying to preserve something or conserve something, and in a lot of the cases here at Formby it's about conserving some of those really, really rare species. So there's lots of very, very rare species that live within the Sefton coast. We have some very, very rare amphibian and reptile species, things like natterjack toads, sand lizards. We also have some grey crested newts, which is a rare amphibian species, and then on top of that we have other rare species. We have insects, things like the northern dune tiger beetle, the limegrass moth, the Portland moth. We have some very rare plant species like petalwort and dune helleborine, and they all live within very, very different dune habitats. And realistically here at Formby and on the Sefton coast, the reason why this area is so heavily protected by legislation is for the sand dune habitats and the creatures that live within the sand dunes. There's a lot of things that are happening along the Sefton coast, not just National Trust, which is working to help the species that are under threat, whether it's sand lizard or natterjack toad, northern dew tiger beetle. There's loads of stuff going on. So here at Formby, we do a lot of things like habitat creation, so we put in new natterjack breeding pools. We also work to try and improve the habitat that's there, whether that's trying to rebuild sand dunes in places where they've been lost usually through human trampling. We're also looking much longer term at Formby, so we're looking at how we deal with things like the car park being in the wrong place, the infrastructure that is stopping that natural movement of the dunes inland, because that is ultimately what is affecting and fragmenting the habitat of these species.
There's a range of different strategies for managing coastal erosion. Some of those rely on engineering solutions, and those would be solutions that are favoured where you have important populations, infrastructure, and assets that are very valuable and are at risk. So things like seawalls or engineered rock or concrete built structures that protect an area from flooding. So really the most effective way to manage and maintain the integrity of those sorts of coastal systems and habitats is to provide space for them to respond to things like storms and sea level rise, whilst not losing habitat area. So for somewhere like Sefton, the best way to do that would be to strategically fell some of the woodland that's at the back of the dunes, and thereby you would create a larger dune area, which is the spaces where the natterjack toad and the sand lizards live, and that would provide you with a buffer and some space for the dunes to roll over into a previously wooded area, and you could essentially buy some significant amount of time therefore to maintain that open habitat for those species to survive. That of course is not without its conflicts, because the pine woodland itself is a habitat for red squirrel, which is also sort of a fragmented and endangered species. So you need to carefully sort of balance the conservation of things in the dunes and conservation of other species in other areas to make sure that you're doing things to satisfy one thing without having a detrimental impact on somewhere else. Because a lot of these plants and animal species that live in these sort of coastal areas are protected, and they're protected by the European Habitats Directive, which means that we have a legal obligation to conserve and maintain those habitat areas. And if they are being lost due to erosion, then you can be prosecuted for not looking after your habitat areas. So that's one reason why we should care, because those species are part of our heritage. They're very important parts of wider ecosystems, so we shouldn't just overlook and dismiss them. And that's how you can create, suitable spaces for them to live in if you manage the coastline, sustainably.
Every single animal is as important as every single human. We are all animals, we're all inhabitants of this planet. Every human is as important as every lugworm that grows. We are no more important than those creatures. Every single creature plays a part within its ecosystem and has equal importance. And so we should all be doing everything we can to try and reverse that decline within species, and also to stop the mass extinction that's essentially happening in this country, and not just in this country and in the world as a whole. And every single person can play a part.